The sound's even working on this damn thing. My sound had no issues, and then all of a sudden, tons of issues. Kind of makes recording, being as cumbersome as it is, futile. But I will try once again to come up with. So, as you know, I've talked about how I've railed against the machine, literally. I've gone to the ends of myself. I've seen crazy things happen, mainly dealing with other people and a belief or a conjuring of certain dark forces and entities, right? That are obviously aware, watching, but could be also considered. I don't even know if this is coming in, so it really deters me from wanting to do any more live streams. So we'll see. But other than the sun shining really bright and seeming to change how it shines and good feelings, right? Good feelings. What I see is, my experience is that I see occult organizations continuing on. I see child trafficking continuing on. I see exploitation of people, harvesting of organs continuing on. I see all the deviant shades and types of human behavior continuing. And ultimately, it wants to put us all, it wants us in fear, and it wants us to be put out on the street. And to face sort of like our true selves, right? Not sort of, like the people that we would be, that is beneath it. That's all I see. I see no evidence of anything else. I see a reduction and confusion and an intentional game. I think Christians are some of the dumbest, low IQ people that I've ever met in my life. I've known many. I used to, be a regular participant, not out of my own choice. But later, I did choose to go to church. There's a very dark energy in church. There's a very dark energy that surrounds the Bible. There is quite a bit of confusion mixed in with revelatory items of interest. I unlike the Gnostic informant, Neil, I don't agree that it's there's conclusive evidence to say that Jesus ever even existed. The name Jesus didn't exist, was changed based upon translation. The latest argument is that things couldn't be translated from Greek, right? That this whole thing starts with Iman Hillman, and then Danny Jones had some people on his program, and it's just creating this like endless loop, this rhetoric. And then you go back like the sacred mushroom, and there, you have a language specialist who's explicitly saying, no, you can't, you can't get an accurate, direct translation when you're downgrading language, and then these other people say something different. I don't want to listen to another person again in my life. I'm so burned out on religion, UAP, UFO. I don't give a fuck, man. I just want to break free, And I think that that's what draws people in, is that they're constantly on the fence with themselves, but what ends up happening is people don't have principles at the end of the day, right? And it seems like if you believe in purity and you have faith in purity, that you are worthless, right? And the only way that you'll be of any value is if you're willing to exploit your own purity, that you will purify yourself and then exploit it and sell it, basically. So it really seems like there is a mastermind, and I don't think calling it Lucifer or Satan, when Lucifer and Satan is used in such a different way from biblical terms. Like even Antichrist, these things are not used in the formal traditions that is being espoused, and laid upon by the Christian church. Like, instead of saying how much of a Bible Belt believer you are, like the End Times Productions, read scriptures. Like, read the scriptures. And then allow others to say that's not what it says. Okay? Like, open yourself up and make every single, if you really want to prove that you're not a liar and you're not trying to, get past 1 million subscribers and suck your cheeks in. And those are some of the most small-minded, pompous people on End Times Productions. Like, literally, they will bring up certain topics because they're trying to stay cutting edge, and then they just throw in a little blurb about Christianity or whatnot. Personally, the evidence is startling when you look at this being a potential cult. I talked about Mark, 14:58, where it's like, what the hell was Jesus doing with a naked little boy? What the hell was Jesus doing in this so-called, I'm not giving it credence, but the secret, gospel of Mark, which may very well have been a forgery, right? But what would, if that were true, right? What was he doing spending the night with a naked boy, right? So you get into these mystery schools, and that's exactly what's being pushed now, right? That this sexual agitation is how we work. And when you look at, like, I posted something up on my blog, right, about this tribal war that many people have seen. It's gotten a lot of views back in 1964. And you're watching these stupid idiots as if they're out there, participants in a sporting event, and all their howling and growling and their slow movements, and they basically go to war for no better reason, right, than to base that, like, that's part of their tribal system, that's part of their belief system, right? And it's who they are, so they acknowledge that. And then sometimes people die, and it's a way of them to keep their libidos up, right? But it also caps them. It like, you see these tribes, and they're not big, strong warriors. They're very reduced, very lean, almost feminine type bodies with small phalluses. So you wonder, this whole brute force concept, where you'd think of like Valhalla and the Vikings and so forth. It's all a lot of dress and finery, right? So I think a lot of people are getting that follow this, and have brushed themselves against the academic community, and they're looking into this so deeply, right? And they've been studying this for years, and they've got multiple degrees, and they come up empty just like everyone else. They want to make it appear like they have some sort of Gnostic type knowledge, but they're the first people, pragmatically, empirically, to say, I don't know what the fuck's going on, right? The same questions on a channel like this one, where you've got this person who's gone through strange experiences that have yet to be acknowledged, as far as providing some sort of information as to the origins of how the fuck this works. And the only thing, you have to go through this process of reduction, right? You have to be able to prove that it wasn't people, that it wasn't technology, that it isn't systematically being done, and nothing, not including anything that that this so-called speculative Jesus or Isis or King Isis, you know. In my opinion, Ralph Ellis's work still stands on par or above everyone else that has anything to say. They're stuck in the loop, right? These people who have multiple degrees in theology. In other words, it's pertinent that people still be deceived and believe in this bullshit, right? So you get down to fundamental truths like believing in yourself, right? And then you get down to the fundamental truth of compromise and of sexuality, right? That the only time that you feel or see any sort of difference is when you really are going into this corruption, this corruptive process. And it's almost as if if there were a speculative God, it doesn't understand the psychology or the presence of how human beings work, right? Or that there is, it's almost as if there is the idea and the culmination of a purity where it is necessary to deceive people and to get them to think that purity does exist, that innocence does exist, only to be able to exploit it and use it in a monetary fashion of exchange. So there's nothing positive about existence that I see. And I've delved in, I've railed my head against the machine. I've allowed myself to go into leveled areas of corruption. I've railed against the machine and gone into these pure states of manifestation and idea and education. I've helped the weak and given up my ambitions for other people. I've been just the opposite. I've succeeded and shrewdly pushed ahead, right? I've shown the ability to have the margin and to be able to marginally be able to access not only just information that's available in the field and beyond the field, right? Reaching beyond this corrupted state. And it's just disheartening to see how things come back around to the same fucking thing over and over again. Like, this world is set on a computational scale where it cannot upgrade, and you see the same players. Like, this is the thing. This really describes everything, right? Is that you could have someone who's completely disgraced, like the Liver King, right? Somebody who's been shown to be a total fraud, and you'll look at their subscriber count and people still want to watch because it's entertainment, right? And even more so, they would say, "Oh, I knew it all along." I mean, who cares? You know, I was just waiting until the guy admitted it, you know, or you know, BitBoy, right? Where he really was trying to recap and become a better person, but he didn't know how. And now he just looks like this nervous drug addict, right? This greedy, nervous drug addict with these big, huge bug eyes that looks like he's capable of, you know, trying to murder people in a very sloppy way at some fast food restaurant, hijacking late at night. Like, he's such an unstable person, right? That, you know, he gave up his millions of subscribers and his millions of, you know, he was making, that's how he reinvested the money back into cryptocurrency. He doesn't have that flow of income anymore. And it's amazing how many people will go back. He still has 150,000 subscribers. Like, he built it up to that level. And it's like, there isn't a craving for greater knowledge. The herd doesn't do anything that it doesn't have to last minute. And it reminds me of the New Guinea war that they show on YouTube, 1964. It's like, that's insane that these very limited people would choose to go to war. There's no real reason for it. There's no land grab. There's no real true rivalry. There's almost identical tribal systems And sort of this Abrahamic bullshit, right? Of how you can just sort of create this dualism. And even more so, this seems off topic, but if you were to look at one of these right brain, left brain exercises that you see, such as a cube, right? And you can see it either sort of inverting or turning one way or turning the other way, like the face of it that's closest to you becomes sort of like an illusion, right? Where you saw it through a sort of a left brain mechanism. To be able to switch that over and then to even see both sides in this sort of transient space, that's the type of psionic activity that we're talking about. It's that simple, to where the computational system will regard you as somebody who is able to switch between interfaces, and then it uses you. Like it literally invites you, induces you into using John Dee type symbols, pentagrams, if you will, going into these rituals with altars, these occult rituals that invite communication, where at the end of it all, you're supposed to go into wife swapping and human sacrifice. And then you're supposed to die at the end, right? And everybody dies horribly. Their souls are taken, right? And you see the unfortunate outcome, even with somebody like Ted Owens, right? Or the PK man, which is crazy, right? That Jeffrey Mishlove, I'm gonna grab another piece of chicken here. Jeffrey Mishlove would completely bypass Jason Reza Giorgiani because of what he, assumed Jason as having these right-wing ideologies. That's gross. It's like a weird foam on this. And otherwise, Jason, in his interviews with Jeffrey on New Thinking Aloud, would have taken off. People would know who he is, And then when you get into Jason Reza Giorgiani, you'd be hard pressed to really prove that he's not a Mossad agent. Like he doesn't even. It's disgusting. He doesn't even argue against it all that firmly. And on top of all the shit that's going on, all these fat cats manipulating people, the cryptocurrency market's one of the dumbest things you can get involved in. It was produced, I don't think it was produced through the NSA. I personally think that it was destined to be created, or at least for us to think we created it, right? But that it's all part of the archived information that's always been around. It's not that complex. It's disgusting. I really hate having to eat. I think we live in crude bodies that do not serve the consciousness well. Yeah, I can't get my sound right. And I apologize, but I don't look at my screen very often because I'm walking. I'm definitely not tried and true and good for shout outs, that's for sure. In fact, I did a test to see if my audio was working before this, and it wouldn't even let me play that specific live stream, so I'm using this kind of as a test live stream. I don't look at my screen, again, because I'm walking and I'm doing what I do in a typical day. And that's all we can do. Like the only thing that you really have, so I mean, it comes down to certain stoic practices where you accept that, you accept life circumstances on the terms that they present themselves as. But you'd be hard pressed to say that other people aren't changing the very ground that you walk on. And as it seems, the very gravity of the world that you live in. And why there's so much asymmetrical power polarity is beyond me. No, it doesn't come down to simple adages like when they say absolute power corrupts absolutely, you know, or that the most bullshit one is that evil prevails because good people don't do anything. They're inert. Bullshit. You could get a whole army of people that are doing benevolent things and they will not be able to change a goddamn thing. And you watch it happen. You watch it happen around you. You watch the corruption take place. You got family members, you got friends who suddenly find out, you know, they've been doing deviant things for years, right? And that the people, in other words, there's this secluded connection, intimate connection with an unseen force. But that unseen force is not benevolent, is not omniscient, and we want to pretend that we have the ability to make a call, right? And to sort of change our state of mind and make sure, oh no, I'm not going to be talking to, you know, this is on a very simple scale. I'm not going to be talking to Lucifer. I'm not going to be talking to Satan. I'm not going to be talking to Abraxas. I'm not going to be talking to Hathor. I'm not going to be talking to Tiamat, right? And so what they get into is their state of mind determines what they're able to access. What if none of that was true? What if you were built and put together to access one telephonic connection, a psychical telepathic connection to an entity or force or computational system. And it's just like when you go online, you don't have the ability to use multiple networks. You signed up for one. That's the only way you're going to get online. You either use it or you go drive over to a Starbucks and try to do the same thing while you use your phone, right? That's offline. You don't have choice. You think you have choice in the God head that you choose. And this illusion is exactly what all this artwork that's being depicted in the tarot, the Masonic rites, right, and rituals, Rosicrucian artwork, on and on and on. But it's the same artwork. It's obvious that it's the same. Like when you look into it, it's the same black and white checkerboard. It's the same right-left paradigm. It's the same scopic view of, can you see that this could be seen in two different ways? Like if you can switch between sort of a left and right brain dichotomy, that you're actually seeing something that looks like it could come toward you, like a pathway, or away from you. It gets so fucking old, right? But this is what this process church is supposedly about, where they say there's like this direct connection to gate, right? So you're talking about these high achieving sort of students. I remember people that were engaged. Even though I was a smart kid and I could have gotten great grades, I didn't. I saw the program back then just like I see it now. You know, even though I would have made a good soldier, I knew what the wars were being fought for. I knew that people were being sacrificed. Even though I could have voted for several people, I've never voted in my life, and I never will, because I've always seen. Am I ignorant? No, I understand the system. I understand the feudalism. I understand that this is a constitutional republic, that it is not a democracy, and that it goes much deeper into feudalism, right? And I know this. I know this because I'm a listener, I'm a learner, I'm a studier of true information. Now, has any of that information helped me? It hasn't. Has any of the striving toward truth and purity ever assisted me in any way? I couldn't say that for sure, because in times where I have allowed myself to become more corrupt, to test the whole thing, to see whether or not this fucking machine is just going to spit out the same thing regardless, irregardless of a focus on principles or purity, right? It will absorb you. I've come right to the mouth of it. Like it's very serious. So is the best that we can get an unfulfilled, unanswered ignorance, like the Garden of Eden suggests, that we remain ignorant, that we don't try and understand things to a greater extent. But the obvious aspect to this, the mind F, is the fact that we're created to think more, challenge ourselves more, do more, learn more, and to go up into this upper stat or status. And it seems like people are being assisted to do this. Now, when you get back around to who's assisting, you see the same altars. You see the same process, right? It happens over and over and over again. It's bizarre. And for you to rely on scripture when there's so much incoherent dribble that's being suggested, there's so much dark magic imbued into the biblical aspects of even how it's being misrepresented in the translations, you know? So if you want to get into Amon Hillman, if you want to get into these people who go the other way, in a very extreme and aggressive way, where they do what Anton LaVey did, and it's basically like, no, you're all effed up, and so therefore I'm a Satanist, right? And it really drives me crazy when interview after interview, even more recent interviews with Jason Riza Georgiani, where he says, well, I mean, you are a Satanist, because all it means is you're, adversary, right? But there has to be a disambiguation between, so perhaps that's not the name for this particular venture, this particular deity or causal set of corruption. Because again, when you look at the people who run the Satanic Church, when you look at the people who run the Temple of Set or the Temple of Satan, right? They are obviously under attack. Like they have these power, they try to give you these power looks, in their pictures, but you can see them just being torn apart. You can see that it's gotten into the very fibrage of the components of how they're being held together, because they're always staying in this sort of mystical state of mind, right? Of deviation and corruption. And so, is it even possible for someone like John Dee, who took this to a whole nother level, to exist now? Man, I should have washed off that chicken. I can feel the the antibiotics, and usually I'm better at that. In fact, I'm gonna wash all this off after you make it. You have to look at the weird stuff that's coming off of it. And that was never an issue in the distant past. But it is now. And you will literally get sick. And it's things like that where it's like, well, it doesn't say to wash it off. It doesn't say that there's going to be, and it doesn't have to tell you. And that's how life is as well. That life doesn't, this life, if you want to refer to existence here as life, but you can see even the term life through many different contexts, through an ontological context, epistemological context, a more secular process. It means something entirely different, So this is where these arguments between biological male and female just continue on, along with flat Earth. It looks like these, people, the whole thing's been put to rest. And then you have a whole bunch of other people, just like people who subscribe to Andrew Tate, right? Or Liver King. Like these people got enough exposure, and there's enough people to where they will always have an army of idiots. In fact, it serves in their favor that if they lost 50,000 or 100,000 subscribers that were more perspicaciously minded of a higher quality or a higher nature of thought, and they were no longer on the fence, that they're going to be replaced and recruited by an army of idiots who are more than willing to spend their money, the last money that they have, in order to say, this is my hero, this is my God, right? This goes along with the prescriptive process of what I think, and as far as I'm willing to push myself about who I am, I align with this. This person's not pushing me too far in the areas of philosophy or spirituality. I'm able to get, from a materialistic sense, I'm able to get what I need by following Andrew Tate, who stuffs socks down the front of his pants and then gallivants around like that's, and all he's doing is exploiting people. You have to ask yourself origins. Where did they get their seed money? Same with Trump. Ask yourself, where did they get the origin of their seed money? When you see that, and you see that these people, if they started from a pure state, without exploiting other people, without getting an inheritance, right? Without other people placing them on sort of a pedestal, that they wouldn't even be able to survive. And you see that they were put in a position because of their weakness, because their lack of development, that would sway a certain sect of people, a certain number of the masses that is strikingly larger than anybody would ever have imagined. And even more so, then there's political interest. They'll back anything else you say. They'll back your morality if you support a cause that feeds money right into their pocket and their bank accounts, right? So what you have is these copycats, these mimics, who end up feeling like they have richer lives because now they feel like they don't have to worry about anything. And all this insider trading, all they have to do is start to understand and watch, right? The big duck, all the communication, telegraphing communication to people, listening to every single interview and going, okay, I know what Elon's going to do this time. I know what Trump's going to do this time. I've seen this before. That's why I watch it. And then I watch the markets, right? And there's always, and then the people that are out, right? The people who aren't going to bend into submission, who aren't going to supplicate, well, they're just fucked, right? They're poor. And so what are we always dealing with? We're always dealing with the same shit, like these two sides that seem like these New Guinea tribes from 1964, right? Go watch that. It's fucking crazy. And it's the most boring war you'll ever see in your life. But you have these very almost feminine looking men that aren't showing this sort of, and neither are there Gorkhals. They sound more like birds and they wear like feathers and things like this, right? And you could see that the description and the idea of a warlord, of a supremacy, it's all a big paracosm. It's a lie, right? So we get into that again. We get into what is a paracosm. It's when somebody sees the world and creates a world within their mind to sometimes great precision and detail, to where their world, from a sociopathic sense, can be more vivid and more real than the world around them, how they perceive things, the symbols of what things represent, right? How the world functions, right? Even more to the point, if they're raised with certain ideologies or belief systems that are centered around certain gods or status, when you're talking about like evil, good and evil, certain archon type energies, right? Where you have this sort of demonic force and sort of an angelic force, and how they can create this illusion in their mind. And if they believe in that illusion enough, they can convince other people to follow along with their paracosm. So you'd be hard pressed to prove that that's not the end all goal with everything. That if Tom Cruise can follow such a bullshit Scientology, right? Dianetics. Dianetics was before Scientology added in the e-meter, added in the more poofed up story, to where, you know, you have people that are working for years to get up to this certain status or state, and then all of a sudden they're coming to this briefcase being put in front of them, and they're reading the original manuscripts from L. Ron Hubbard, and they're like, this is the craziest drivel I've ever heard in my fucking life. This makes zero fucking sense. Because it's not really about the ritual system, but the fact that, just like the Masons, that you have a system that you believe in, that you've invested yourself and put everything that you have into this, and now you're left empty. But guess what? Something else will catch you, right? And you are inducted into the Masonic Hall at that point. There's no other place you can go, because of the fact that we need principles. So when you find that the religion you believed in is devoid of principles, and you thought that you were going to ascertain or attain a higher gnosis or level of knowledge, and you don't achieve that, well, you begin to start looking for structural complicity worldwide as to what makes something work. You know that something can't really work the way that it does, right, on a larger scale, with this sort of webbing of interconnectivity. And you start to see how Scientology, every religion, simply works as a hub or a junction point that connects back to, I hate to say it again, but it's the Knights of Malta. It goes back through the Ophites, and it goes back to Babylon. And that's not even the origin or the true hub of it, but it has to set up through, after the post-Younger Dryas, it had to set up an information hub. It's almost like Babylon, if you look at it historically, was almost like going to the Chamber of Commerce, right? Every 4,000 years, you have to be reminded of what the fuck's going on, why you're alive, and the direction you're supposed to go in. But otherwise, you're out there getting fucked with, and your aspersion toward trying to go toward this altar and sacrifice animals and people, well, that's in you, that's put in you. And only when you don't do that, and this comes back to the Farmer's Almanac, if you follow it back far enough, it's like when they don't do certain things like that, you start to see the turbulence and the strange weather patterns that start to get you scratching your head. And then when you go to the PK man, Ted Owens, and how he proclaimed that he could control the weather, that he could cause storms, and soon after, the potential, right, that something was either acting through him, or that he did this through the mental mind efforts, right, that he used regularly, right? He would go through something. If you want to know more about him, you can go on New Thinking Aloud, Jeffrey Mishlov's channel, but he knew him very well, even took his courses, and he's even seen, like he says that there was over 160 documented successful applications that Ted Owens did. And finally, a lot of people think that he was taken out either psionically or cymatically, with instrumentation, where they've had the ability to stop people's hearts right in their chest and to even, sway autopsies and so forth. There's no way you can believe anything really. But that after he blew up the NASA shuttle mission back in the 80s, I think it was 84, 82 or 84, he died soon after that. And many people thought that it was because of him. He could focus in, and so was something working through him? That's the fundamental question. And he was asked these things, right? And this is what brings the significance of PK Man. And in a large part, why Jeffrey Mishlove is probably spot on with this whole thing, where he keeps highlighting and bringing him back up over the years. I think he's written more than one publication. I think there's at least 2 publications that he wrote about Ted Owens, the PK Man, because the evidence is to him irrefutable, right? To the point where there's supposedly documented newspaper articles. And I'm surprised when he was on Danny Jones being interviewed, he didn't talk about this tirelessly, but he did bring it up, and he brings it up over the years over and over again. And if we could prove or disprove that one person, right? So he does say, Ted Owens does say that, sometimes it's through him, right? To where the entities or entity will act through him, which he, I believe, says that it's a mantis insectoid. So when you get into this weird ass shit, it's the same thing that this Eric Davis is talking about. In mass, people are turning toward these people because of their credentials and the assumed influence that they have over a certain community. We have to stop that. People have to start thinking for themselves, and then to realize that once they are no longer tapped in, that they were addicted to having something, because people are afraid of the latency or the inert aspect of coming back to themselves and not feeling like they have all this energy, like they have all this false power, induced or inducted through them. And to come back to the fact that you're just a person trying to live, trying to mechanically go through your life, trying to do the best that you can do, right? And that you shouldn't break out of the work life pattern, that you're going to try and keep at least a more stoic aspect, right? To how you don't question things, but we're forced to question them because of this discrepancy. Because we want to know why the fuck the World Trade Centers were blown up and who the fuck did it, right? We want to know what the Philadelphia experiment was about. We want to know what Montauk Project was all about. We want to know what Project Paperclip and, all these other fucking programs were about. We want to know the countless sightings of people around Mount Shasta that saw these fucking 7-foot tall people, skinny, white, 7-foot tall Nordic people, inviting them into the inner earth. They want to know why the fuck that's happening, right? People want to know why a lot of the things that Jason Rizzo-Giorgiani talks about with these Nords, where there's countless proofs, documented proofs, that these things kind of can turn anything into a spaceship, right? Not a spaceship, but they're flying through space in the traditional sense of not in space, but the space around you, and that there's a very good probability that they come from the inner earth, So we get into that. Anyway, I'm getting back to my walk.